very diverse forms, and I'm going to try to specify the kinds of tools that are available. Ethical abstractions can be a recipe for confusion. So here the idea is we want to be very concrete about what the ethical concern is and what the tool is. Third, if welfare is our guide, if John Stuart Mill is our hero, much nudging is actually required on ethical grounds. And if autonomy is our guide, if Kant is our hero, then much nudging is also required on ethical grounds. I want to make a little comment right now on that fourth point. It's often said, I think in many countries, that people who are poor and struggling should take more responsibility for their lives. It's often thought the problem that poor people face is that they aren't being responsible for their lives. There's a passage from a great economist from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology named Esther DeFlo, where she urges we should stop berating poor people for not taking responsibility for their lives and think instead about the ways in which people who aren't poor don't have to take responsibility for their lives because things are taken care of for them. The idea is, if you are doing well in a place that's operating well, if you do nothing, you're on the right track. For poor people or people under difficult conditions, if they do nothing, they are on the wrong track. Now this is abstract, but if you think about wealthy communities in Mexico, the air is pretty clean, isn't it? That if people want to get a doctor, they can, they know how. The water is safe to drink. The level of crime isn't that high. There are a lot of things that are taken care of for you. You don't have to think about that. But poor people under difficult conditions, they have to think about what happens if my child gets sick, what happens if the food is unsafe, what happens if a criminal is coming toward me. They don't have good answers to those questions, which is to say that much nudging, which can make it so that people don't have to take so much responsibility, it is taken care of for them, promotes autonomy rather than reducing it. Okay, here is an effort to be more specific about nudges. Default rules are a very important nudge. What happens if you do nothing? So computers have a setting for printing, single-sided or double-sided. You probably know what your printer has as the default setting, single-sided or double-sided. It turns out that one very good way to save money, and it's good for the environment too, is to shift the default setting from single-sided to double-sided. In fact, that simple nudge has a larger effect in decreasing paper use than a 10% tax on paper use. Education, to tell people don't use so much paper, has essentially no effect on paper use, but a change in the default setting has a very large effect on paper use. We had a little conference at the White House a few years ago where we said to about 300 people who were coming to our conference, it was on open government, that the default lunch is going to be bean sprout sandwiches. That's what you're going to get unless you indicate some other preference. Now, no one likes bean sprout sandwiches. We also said it would be bean sprout sandwiches with soy cheese. People really don't like bean sprout sandwiches with soy cheese. We said if you want another kind of lunch, you're welcome to have it, but you have to indicate your preference. Very few people change their preferences. They came in with bean sprout as the default sandwich. When they got there, were very upset to hear they were going to have a bean sprout sandwich with soy cheese. Now, we were not cruel. We gave them a better tasting lunch, but it shows the default really matters. And if you think about your employer, your your government institutions, your bank, there are default settings everywhere. You can change them if you want to, often, but frequently people don't change them. They really matter. Simplification is a great nudge. I heard yesterday about areas where regulations in Mexico are just too complicated for people to understand, so they don't comply with them. That's a problem in the United States also. The thing I heard most from regulated people in the United States was, make things simpler so we can understand it. We will understand it. We will comply if we can understand. We can't understand. Simplification is a great nudge. If you give people information, or if you disclose things to people, you can have a big impact on their behavior. That app that shows you where the ATMs are and whether they're green or red, more banks, I'm told, have green ATMs because they don't want to have the red ones, which are a little embarrassing. There's a phrase in the United States, sunlight is the best of disinfectants. Sunlight is the best of disinfectants. Here the idea is disclosure can make things cleaner. We talked a little bit, a colleague and I, just in the last hour, about the Open Government Partnership, OGP. Mexico has the presidency now of the Open Government Partnership. It's a great opportunity to use openness as a way of nudging both governments and the private sector in better directions. It's a great worldwide chance. Warnings are a nudge. Reminders are a nudge. There's a recent study showing that many parents in the United States don't do very well with their young children in preparing them for kindergarten. They just don't know what to do. One intervention that's had a big effect is to send reminders by text message. Many patients who could benefit from taking their medicine regularly don't. Reminders are a nudge. They are extremely helpful. So my hope is when people have cell phones, if you use a nudge in the form of a reminder, you can often have a very large impact on people's behavior. Increases in ease and convenience are a nudge. I know there's a growing problem of obesity in Mexico, though you all look very thin. One possible help for the problem of obesity is to make healthy, low-calorie foods easy and convenient to find. If once you go to the grocery store, there's high-calorie foods, and the more healthy stuff is toward the back, people aren't going to get that. You have a big impact on people's choices. This is a form of choice architecture through making the healthy foods more convenient. Uses of social norms can have a big impact on behavior. Is this better, the microphone like this? Do you prefer this? Should I start from the beginning? Okay. Use of social norms goes like this. If you let people know that their behavior is in the minority of what most people do, that can have a big impact in getting them to start to behave like the majority does. There's a company called O-Power, which is now doing business all over the world, which sends people a very short home energy report telling them how their energy use compares to that of their neighbors. The effect of that short home energy report is equal to the effect of an 8 to 20% increase in the price of electricity. That is, the home energy report gets them to decrease their energy use, the same as an 8 to 20% increase in the price of electricity. Social norms are often a big motivator of behavior. In the United Kingdom, they've had a problem with non-compliance with the tax laws. People sometimes don't pay their taxes. Prime Minister Cameron has used this idea to send letters to people who aren't paying their taxes, not saying, we're going to prosecute you, not saying you should be scared of us, not saying we need your taxes so we can provide education and police protection, but saying instead, you're in a small minority of people in your community who aren't paying your taxes. That works. That has a big effect. So it's worth experimenting with efforts to let people know that if they're engaging in undesirable behavior, it might even be corruption or criminality. That if it's true that that behavior is a small minority of people, that can drive the amount down still. Public recognition of some kind can often have a big effect. I had a conversation a few weeks ago with the president of Rwanda, who said he has many challenges in Rwanda, though they've made great progress. And one challenge is some regions are doing much better than other regions at helping their people and at improving government performance. One thing he's done is have an annual meeting of all the regions where there is a public report of performance, and the ones who have done the best get some sort of recognition from the president. He said that's had a very dramatic effect. People want to get that recognition, and they don't want to be poor performers. That's a nudge. There's no mandate or coercion or ban that accompanies recognition. Sometimes you can have a big impact on people just by asking them what choice they want to make. Active choosing is often a good spur to better behavior, and sometimes active choosing needn't be required, it can just be prompted by having a public official or a private company or a bank ask, what would you like? Do you want to make a choice? That's a nudge. Often people can make a voluntary agreement in advance not to engage in a course of conduct. Here's a good way to get people to vote. Amazingly, this is a good way to get people to vote. Ask people, do you intend to vote? That increases the likelihood that they will vote. If you ask them, do you intend to vote? And if so, where do you intend to vote and when? Implementation intentions, that's a nudge, no coercion. That increases voting behavior. So one question you can ask people if you're worried about obesity is, do you intend to start eating more healthy? When? That can have a real impact. Population-wide, a significant impact, asking people about implementation intentions. So that's an assortment of 10 nudges. Okay. Here are 4 qualifications, or 3 qualifications that I think are important. First, active choosing can indeed be best, and it is a form of choice architecture. So if when people go to get their driver's license, I gather here, I heard a fascinating account here of now people get their driver's licenses automatically and very easily. So the question is, where is there a domain where people have to engage with the government to get something? If they can be asked, what do you want? That can often be highly desirable as a way of respecting individual dignity. Choice architecture, this is very important, must be transparent and subject to public scrutiny. If you have choice architecture that is hidden and secret and that is imposed on people without their hearing about it, that can be affirmatively harmful. Choice architecture must not be undertaken for illicit ends, meaning you could use choice architecture to try to promote violence or bias or bigotry, and that would be, needless to say, bad. So we need to make sure that choice architecture is done for ends that are legitimate. Okay, here are 5 concerns. Do nudges violate individual rights? Do they compromise autonomy? Do they compromise dignity? Do they treat people with respect? And do they help people to learn? Those are some good concerns. Okay, the first page of nudge defines our objective, the objective of the ideas I'm describing, which are to influence choices in a way that will make choosers better off as judged by themselves. Notice, if you would, the italics, as judged by themselves. Maybe it should be in bold as well as the italics. If the government is using nudges to try to get people in a position that they don't themselves believe is better, that's a problem. So the as judged by themselves standard is usually pretty simple, and even if it's not always simple, it's the right lodestar. In a democratic society, we are respecting people's individual judgments. Okay. Every website nudges. Whatever you see first is likely to draw the eye, and if it's bigger, it's likely to draw the eye as well. A cafeteria or an electronics store has a bunch of nudges in it. Google has a cafeteria in New York. I haven't been, but they apparently changed it in recent years to make it more healthy, not by taking away the fattening foods, not by doing that, but by making the healthy foods more visible and accessible. A cafeteria inevitably highlights some things and not others. A cell phone, lawyers and doctors, the law, government, nudging is inevitable. You can't not have it. Okay. I think the most exciting work in social science in the last 30 years has involved human error, the ways in which human beings go wrong. Are you all familiar with behavioral economics as a field? Is that familiar? Some of you are nodding. I'll tell you a little bit about it. Okay, I'll give you a few findings. When people are trying to assess probability, how likely is it that something will happen, they often use something called the availability heuristic. Availability heuristic, which means they ask, is an example available? Does it come to mind? Many people in the United States have been very frightened of Ebola, even though the risks are very, very low. And it's because the examples of cases in which people have gotten sick, they're very available. They come to mind. They get a lot of attention. So I'm hoping you can think of cases in Mexico where a highly publicized incident has made people very fearful of a risk that is actually quite low, and of cases where maybe something isn't publicized, but it happens a lot and the risk is really high and people aren't scared enough. So the availability heuristic means our probability judgments sometimes go wrong, and that can lead to mistaken individual judgments and mistaken government policies. There's a systemic bias that people are subject to called present bias, meaning they think that today and tomorrow matter, and the future is a foreign country, later land, and they're not sure they're ever going to visit later land. Will you do a little test of present bias right now? Think about yourself for a moment, please. Let's have a narcissistic moment. Everybody think about yourself. Two of you are not thinking about yourself. Think about yourself. Okay, as you thought about yourself just now, a part of your brain actually lit up. There's a part of the brain that lights up when you think about yourself, and it just did. Now think about yourself, if you would, on a beautiful beach in South America in a year from now. We're talking December, a little more than a year, December 2015, you're on the beach. Think about yourself in a bathing suit. Now for some of you, a certain number of you, that part of the brain lit up again. But for some of you it didn't. Now here's what's interesting. For those of you for whom it didn't, you will rather have a certain amount of money today than a larger amount of money in a week. You will not defer gratification. For people who see their future selves as like strangers, not themselves, they suffer from a lot of present bias. And they're more likely not to save for retirement, not to protect their health for the long term, not to engage in behavior that actually is important given their lifetime. Now, all of us, whether that part of the brain lights up, are potentially subject to present bias. And with respect to savings, training yourself for a good job, healthy eating, obesity, smoking cigarettes, drinking alcohol, present bias is a big source of the problem. We also know that about 80% of the population shows optimistic bias. The vast majority of people think they're safer than the average driver and less likely to be in a serious accident. 94% of college teachers have been found to believe that they're better than the average college teacher. People have an accurate sense of the likelihood that people are going to get divorced, but at the time of marriage, 100 people think that the likelihood that they will stay married is 100%. A majority of smokers has been found to know the statistical risk of smoking, but also to believe that they are personally less likely to get lung cancer and heart disease than the average non-smoker. Okay, optimistic bias can create a lot of trouble in individual lives. Okay. Are you familiar with the book Brave New World? It's a book about a society, really, which is full of comfortable defaults, where everyone has a happy, comfortable life, in part because they're using a drug, but let's put that to one side. The hero of the book is called the Savage, and he says, I don't want comfort, I want God, I want poetry, I want real danger, I want freedom, I want goodness, I want sin. And you can see that very eloquent statement, I think, as a potential concern about nudging. So we could say that some nudges aren't transparent, some might operate behind people's backs, some might be harmful, some might treat people as babies, they might be infantilizing, and some might be violative of rights. Okay. Here's a question. When, if ever, do those objections make sense? Do they make sense when people are given information about the calorie content of food? I hope you're thinking, no. That doesn't offend anyone's dignity. Do they make any sense when people are asked to say what they want? Certainly not. Do they make sense when people are reminded of an appointment or of a bill or of a medical treatment they should be taking? No. That's a helpful way of getting them to the top of the mind. Do they make sense when people are presented with a default rule? Usually not. If your default rule says that you're going to have double-sided printing, does that treat you like a baby? No. You can go single-sided if you want. Recall the list of nudges. Okay, here's a reminder. This is, I think, a defining example of a nudge. A GPS. The GPS is a nudge in the sense that it gives you a route by which you can get to the direction you want, but if you don't like it, you can say to the little voice on the GPS, I'm sorry, I have my own preferred route. Now notice the GPS is gentle in two different ways. First, it is respectful of your ends and just trying to find out a means by which you can fulfill your ends. So if it's a form of paternalism, and it is, it's one that operates in the interest of the destination you want. Now I think that's deeply important, that a government or a private institution can say, we're going to operate like a GPS. We're not going to tell you where to go. We're going to give you a direction that you can chart out to get where you want. It's gentle first in the sense that it's trying to figure out the best means for you to achieve your ends. It's gentle also in the sense that it's soft rather than hard. It's soft in the sense that you can say, no, I'm sorry, I want the scenic way, or I want a long way. I'm not very busy today. I like driving. So you can reject it, it's not coercive, and it's means-oriented. This is my only scandalous slide. I'm a visitor in your country, so I think I'm glad I have only one scandalous slide. The men will recognize this. For the women, if you've never seen one before, this is a urinal. But it's not just any urinal. This is a very important urinal. This is a urinal of historic significance. This is the urinal in the Netherlands airport, and it painted a fly. The people who run the airport painted a fly in the airport. They did that because they had a problem of spillage. And they believed that if they put a fly there, their problem would be reduced. And they're correct. Apparently, when men see the fly, we can't help but aim at it. And the result was to reduce spillage by 44 to 70%. Now, the problem of spillage in an airport isn't the worst problem that a society can face, though this is now very popular. I notice in New York they now have flies in the urinals. But it tells a larger lesson, that if you can attract people's attention and make something salient, you can often have a big impact. Even in cases in which the stakes are much higher, whether the issue involves compliance with the law, which this is not that far from, or behavior that is in the interest of the consumer. Have you heard of the study involving the invisible gorilla? Some of you have. I'll tell you, for those of you who haven't, I'll tell you about the study. I think it's full of implications. The invisible gorilla study, which you can find on YouTube, you see people passing a basketball, and you are asked to count the number of passes. It's hard. There are a lot of passes. When I took the experiment, it's about a 90-second video. I lost track after about 45 seconds. I tried. I was in a group of Harvard faculty. We all failed, but we did our best. And at the end, the experimenter said to my group, "Did you see the gorilla?" And we looked at him and said, "No, of course there wasn't any gorilla. They were passing a basketball." And one person raised his hand and said, "Yes, I saw the gorilla." And we all thought it was a joke. Then we replayed the video, and sure enough, at some point, a human being dressed in a gorilla costume comes in, pounds his chest, and then walks by. And none of us saw the gorilla. So I told my daughter, who's 24, about this experiment, and I told her what I just told you, and then I showed her the video, and she said, "Where was the gorilla?" So even if you know about the gorilla, you might not see it. And this is about the nature of human attention. And human attention is often focused on a small subset of the things you're actually seeing, and what you see is a product of what is made salient. So with respect to the issue of energy efficiency, something people care about a lot, when people buy products, often they think only about how much does it cost and does it work well. They don't think how much is it going to cost me to operate over the next 5 years. Energy efficiency is often like the invisible gorilla. And my question for you is, in what areas in Mexico are there invisible gorillas whose invisibility is causing serious problems, and which there could be something helpful by making it more visible? Okay. Here's what used to be the most visited website of the United States government. It's called the Food Pyramid. There's a person, gender unclear, marching to the top of the pyramid. This is supposed to inform people, teachers, parents, students, what they should eat if they should be eating healthy. Now, notice that imagine you're trying to figure out what to eat. There's a person marching to the top of the pyramid. What's that white triangle? Is that death? Is it heaven? Is it thinness? It's unclear, yes? What are you marching to? Climbing to? There are these stripes of various colors, green and red and blue, and they're foods bunched together. What do they connote? Most unclear, isn't it? What are the foods? You recognize the foods that are bunched together? I recognize only one item of the 35 or so. If you look on the bottom right, that looks like a shoe. Does that mean the government is telling you to eat a shoe? We got rid of the food pyramid and replaced it with a food plate, which is, it says very simply, make half your plate fruits and vegetables, and you'll probably be fine. That's the simple advice. And this was constructed on the basis of both experts in nutrition and experts in communication and behavioral science trying to figure out what would be simple and work for people. I have a slogan, and my little slogan for you is plate, not pyramid. Plate, not pyramid. Wherever government is working, or a private institution is working, an educational institution, a parent, an employer, plate, not pyramid. Because often what seems like resistance is a product of ambiguity. People don't know what they're supposed to do. And I'll tell you the origin of my slogan, plate, not pyramid. When I was in government, I had a friend involved in a quite important negotiation between the United States and another country. It wasn't Mexico, it wasn't Russia, it wasn't Syria, but it was an important negotiation. And a few days before the president was personally going to arrive, we didn't really have any agreement on anything. And that's not good. If the president's coming to the country, we want foundations to be in place for an agreement. My friend actually flew to the country to work on the negotiation. And I called to see how it was going and asked the night after the negotiation, and it looked very bleak. How did it go? And the answer on the phone across the international lines was great. And I asked, why? How did that happen? And the answer over the international line was plate, not pyramid. And I asked, what do you mean? And the explanation was, the reason things hadn't been working was the United States and the other country were talking like this. They couldn't figure out what each country was saying. And they had no agreement. It was too obscure. And once the United States, I think it was, said, here are 12 things we'd like. Would you agree on any of them? The other country said, oh, 8 of those are good. We agree with those 8. And that was the foundation. So I thought on the regulatory side, often the problem is that we are treating people in a pyramid-like way. And once we produce the plate, there's more possibility of progress. Okay, do nudges work? If there's any slide you remember, I hope it's this one. This is the one, this is my favorite. This is the one that broke the foot. In Denmark, automatic enrollment in a pension plan, meaning once you start working in a pension plan, you can opt out, but you're automatically in, has a larger impact in increasing savings with significant tax incentives. Now, for a long-time University of Chicago person, me, that is a stunning finding. If you give people big incentives, they ought to change their behavior. That's clear. But the data is, in this context, it has only a modest effect. If you have automatic enrollment with easy opt-out, people can get out if they want. It shouldn't have a big effect. But it has a large effect. So in Denmark, a lot of people are having great savings for retirement because of automatic enrollment. And what I'm thinking is there are many other areas where the same is true, and we just need to investigate what they are. Second slide, we have a law in the United States which discloses information about people's credit card arrangements. It says if you're going to have a late fee, what it is, what your overuse fee will be. It gives you a lot of information. That's helped to save American consumers $20 billion annually. It's a massively successful law. I mentioned the home energy report, which uses social norms. I'll give you one other example from education. People can get financial aid to go to college, but to get financial aid, you have to fill out a form. The form is complicated. It has many pages. We now know that if you simplify the form, you can have the same impact in getting people to go to college that you have if you increase the subsidy per student by several $1,000s. Simplifying the form has the same impact as a several $1,000 increase in the subsidy. Of course, simplifying the form is better, It doesn't cost the taxpayers money. And these are 4 highly successful sets of measures. Okay. Poor children in the United States are supposed to get free lunches and breakfasts, but they often don't because their families don't sign them up. Their families don't sign them up because they are scared of the government, because they are confused by the form, but because they are busy, because their lives are full of serious challenges, and filling out a government form isn't a high priority. That's a problem if their children aren't getting free meals. What we did was to say, we're just going to say, if we know the kids are eligible, we're going to certify them directly. They don't have to fill out the forms. Just changing the default. They're automatically in. And that's contributing to a situation in which 12 million children are enjoying food that they're entitled to. Because of various changes in the interest rates, people have been able to refinance mortgages in the United States and save a lot of money. People have lost billions of dollars because they don't refinance their mortgages, and it's because it's complicated to do it. In Australia, they have a problem with available blood for blood donation. It turns out that for every 20 minutes in extra time people have to wait to give their blood, there's an increased likelihood they won't come back and give blood. And the result of the waiting time, which is a form of complexity, is a 14% reduction in the available blood for people in Australia. I hope that's not a problem here, but it suggests that a nudge in favor of reduced waiting time can have big public health benefits. Okay. It is true that paternalism is not everyone's favorite word. So I think all I want to say is that often there's no neutral way to proceed, and that the word navigability, I wish there were a simpler word for navigability, is maybe a better word than libertarian paternalism. So one big goal should be to try to find ways to make life more navigable for people. If we care about welfare, then making life more navigable is often great on welfare grounds. Life would not be better without a GPS. And if we care about autonomy, life is more autonomous with a GPS because it helps people get to go. Okay, it is true that some nudges can be manipulative, and that's a serious problem. We shouldn't have any untransparent and hidden nudges. They should all be subject to public scrutiny. Okay. Here are a few empirical notes about nudges. It turns out that we know people seem to object to nudges when they don't like them on their merits. They don't object because they are nudges. So if you have a nudge that nudges people in favor of religious hatred, most people are going to hate that. And that's good, because religious hatred is bad. But if you have a nudge that nudges people in favor of saving more for retirement, or doing something to help themselves out of poverty, people tend to like that. Okay, dignity is a very serious idea. It's really important. But warnings and GPSs and reminders aren't going to compromise dignity. It is true that learning is often very important, and if we care about dignity, we will often want to ask people to make choices for themselves. That's the right way to go. That's just to suggest that a choice architect often has a very good judgment to make. Do we go with the default rule, or do we go with active choosing? And if you think about dignity, you might go for active choosing. That might be good. Okay. Who is the choice architect? Many people. They are parents, teachers, bosses, providers of energy, stores, or governments. And it's very important to constrain them, to make sure they do the right thing. The two big safeguards are competitive markets and a well-functioning democracy. So to use competition as a check on bad nudges, to use democracy as a safeguard, that's indispensable. I want to end by just 2 points. What is the most precious commodity that members of the human species have? What's the most precious thing we have? What's a commodity that Hayek and Mill, our great heroes, did not sufficiently consider? It's tempting to respond, I think you're fearful that I'm going to say love, then we all feel that's kind of disgusting, it's true. But that's not my answer. The most precious commodity is time. And the point of increasing navigability and making things easier for people is in part to give people more time to devote to their own concerns. Final question. The one thing that public officials, lawyers, doctors, and critics, judges most often neglect? What's the one thing that governments, I think, pay too little attention to when they're trying to figure out what to do with respect to security, corruption, law enforcement, poverty? What's the one issue they need to put their mind on most that they don't? Peace of mind.